by the way, neuromodulation from the way we saw it back then was the most challenging because the accuracy, the precision, the side effects in the thalamus, as you know very well, is very, very demanding. September 23rd, 2008, it's a time to remember, where the first non-invasive thalamotomy was done in a neuropathic pain patient. And we kind of felt this was maybe the biggest eureka moment of saying, hey, now we got it right. And our ultimate goal is that the patient experience will be such that every patient that can benefit from the treatment will actually get it. So I think at whole, our vision would be that in neurosurgery, there would be an acoustic neurosurgery platform that can actually treat any surgical target, non-invasively. Just hard stuff, no radiation, no incisions, and there does not need. I mean, there will be a day when we will say, why did we cut the body to destroy that target? There are non-invasive ways to destroy that target that are safe and effective.
Welcome to Stimulating Brains.
Hello and welcome to Stimulating Brains. In this episode, we sit down with Eyal Zadicario, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Insightec. We trace together the history of focused ultrasound, from its early experiments to its groundbreaking role in functional neurosurgery today. Eyal reflects on the challenges of translating innovation from academia into industry, designing clinician-friendly interfaces that truly focus on the patient experience, and working through the skepticism that comes with any disruptive technology. We dive into various pivotal milestones, like the first incisionless focused ultrasound thalamotomy, which happened back in 2008 in a neuropathic pain patient. We also talk about the early beginnings of focused ultrasound in breast cancer and how it evolved to tackle an even more challenging role in neuromodulation. Finally, we take a look at the future. We discuss things like opening the blood-brain barrier, the vision for an acoustic neurosurgical suite, and even brain mapping with such technology. I hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, and thank you for tuning in to Stimulating Brains.
So, Eyal, thank you so much for finding the time to talk to us on Stimulating Brains today. It's really a big honor to talk to you about Insightec and your work there, and the work of the company, of course. As you may know, as a icebreaker question, I always ask about hobbies. So, do you have any free time, and if so, what do you do there?
Yeah, there's not a lot of free time, but most of my time away from what we do here is mostly with the family. Love to spend time with the family. I think, our work takes us sometimes far from home too frequently. So being at home with the family is probably the biggest enjoyment I have. We love to cook around the house. We cook together over weekends. So we spend a lot of time, family, either around the home or just traveling together, both with our kind of close family, sometimes our extended families all together. So it's mostly around family time.
Fantastic. And I see the ocean behind you, right? The sea. Is that something you enjoy too?
Yeah. So, our offices in Israel and Haifa are right on the border of the Mediterranean, which is what you see. It's a great view, but it's a great joy to come to work every day, driving along the coast here in Israel. I drive all the way from Tel Aviv to Haifa every day. So okay. It's a nice 1-hour drive along the coast.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. All right. So can you talk a bit about the vision and also how Insightec was founded, so how it all started?
So Insightec was founded with the vision to improve patient care. I mean, you always start and look at the patient first, not so much with the technology. So we looked at surgery. And when you think about the holistic approach of surgery, which has been practiced for decades or centuries, The tools have advanced, but the concept stayed the same. You have a target pathology, you need to usually physically get to it, identify it, feel it, visualize it, and then either treat it, remove it, or do something physically in the body. And our intent was to find a technology or a treatment modality that can do that with not impacting the surrounding tissue. So no incisions and no harm to anything but the pathology that you wanted to treat. And that's what the concept that drove us to look into ultrasound and focus ultrasound as a treatment modality that can actually do that, that can target a pathology, impacting and affecting only that pathology and leaving the entire surrounding area, the skin, the bone, the tissues around the target area completely unaffected or intact. And that was the vision that we started with.
Why ultrasound? Why not? You mentioned radiation or other options. Why ultrasound?
So ultrasound has a very unique, capability. It can penetrate the body, and we use that for diagnostics and for imaging. So it can penetrate both superficial parts of the body and deep in the body. It's really, really effective in penetrating the body. And in certain doses, in certain parameters, it has no impact, which is why we like to use it for diagnostics. And on the other hand, it has no accumulated effect. You can pretty much repeat treatment with ultrasound as much as you can, unlike radiation. So there's no dose limit to how much ultrasound you can apply and without creating damage. So that's another great attribute of ultrasound. But the main thing is that ultrasound can be focused. It can be focused like a magnifying glass focuses the sunlight to create a very high intensity area in the body with a lot of energy or very high intensity energy, while the other surrounding volume around that target or around that tissue has has an energy that's low enough to have no impact on the tissue. So it can be highly focused. The fact it can penetrate the body and the fact it can be highly focused are the two attributes that ultrasound has that no other treatment modality have.
It's really, really interesting how much, ultrasound, like the potential of it, right? We currently at a state where with the Insightec device, for example, lesions are being burned, but of course there's also the blood-brain barrier opening. There's potentially even functional like diagnostics of ultrasound. We can maybe get to that a bit later, but I agree with you. It has, like, as a general premise, it really has many properties that are on the wish list of what we want to do in the brain. So focused ultrasound was there before. What was different? Or how did the company found, like, what was different when you guys started off, or what is different in the approach?
Yeah, so when we started, as you mentioned, focused ultrasound, and not to mention diagnostic ultrasound, but also focused ultrasound was there, for decades before Insightec started. And the fact that I just mentioned around ultrasound being that you can focus ultrasound, that you can penetrate the body, that it can even be used for lesioning or ablation was known before Insightec came around. I think our biggest contribution and I would say advancement was the fact that we've learned that with ultrasound, the variability of how tissue and ultrasound, ultrasound interacts with tissue, or the interfaces between the tissue and ultrasound, have a lot of variability. They depend on the vascularity, on the type of the tissue, on the pathway to the target, and really all the uses of focused ultrasound in the earlier decades by great pioneers were showed that it can be done, but we're not able to, I would say, make it a predictable and robust medical device. What we added was the closed loop aspect. The fact that, like in surgery, you can plan the surgery, but at the end of the day, when you cut into the tissue, when you get to the target, you actually need to visualize what's happening at the target point and adapt your treatment parameters or your treatment plan to the actual anatomy and the actual response of the tissue to the treatment. We call it closed loop in a technical term. And this closed loop allows us to not only visualize the target we are aiming to treat, but also get some feedback in real time. And there's different feedbacks for different modes of action. But the ability to get feedback on, for example, thermometry from the target when we're doing thermal ablation is a key aspect that actually transformed focus ultrasound from just a potential, therapy to a very precise lesioning technology. And without that closed loop, without making sure or confirming that you are actually on the right target, that you're actually modifying in real time the parameters to get the temperature that you want, this would never become a precise and predictable medical device or therapeutic tool.
Okay, so the measure that you can measure, for example, the heating with the MRI in a closed loop, and then while planning kind of increase dosage, that's the key contribution or the key difference that made it a real therapy. Very interesting. I have talked to Kulevro Hynynen on the podcast as well, and I think the ability to penetrate through the skull seems to be also a very important one, right? Because I think there had been focused ultrasound before, once the skull was open, right? That has a very long history even, right? But the MR guidance, is that another key point that was important to overcome the hurdle of the skull?
Yeah, so actually, the ultrasound in general does not penetrate bone very, very well, or actually very little of the ultrasound energy penetrates bone. That's why you don't hear about, ultrasound being used for brain diagnostics. You use either MRI or CT or other diagnostic modalities, because most of the ultrasound does not penetrate through the bone. And actually, we did not start as a company with the brain right away. We originally worked on breast cancer.
Okay.
Which was maybe from a technical perspective the most obvious choice to start, because it's a well-identified target, can be very well visualized on MRI. You can actually, it's almost external to the body in a sense that you can target it without going through a lot of abdominal or other structures to get to the target. So that's where we started. We thought that the brain was too challenging because the skull is just not penetratable for ultrasound. And we started with breast tumors, which we've learned a lot. And basically what I mentioned earlier, the fact that although you can target the ultrasound at the right point, you still need that feedback, because even in the breast tumors, different tumors have different attributes and different parameters needed to actually get to the right temperature and treat them. Was a lesson learned back in those days. The tissue variability is a key thing. And if you don't account for that, if you don't adapt your therapy based on the actual response of the tissue to the ultrasound, then you're never going to be able to do predictable and consistent treatment. So we started with breast, and then moved on to other body parts like uterine fibroids, which is basically our first commercial platform. Again, this was a benign tumor in the uterus with a product that we put out back in 2004, and got it all the way to a commercial approval in 2004.
Is that still active? Like, is that still an active therapy, the breast tumors?
It's an active therapy in some parts of the world still, but we have stopped commercializing that a few years ago.
Okay.
This was one of the, there's something we can talk about later, but there's I would say that the journey of focused ultrasound with Insightec and in general has gone through multiple, applications being developed. We know today that the brain is the one that commercialized most successfully for various reasons that we can discuss later. But we've learned a lot from the earlier experience with breast and with uterine fibroids on how to really plan ultrasound, how to plan therapies to actually be very precise and predictable. And all these lessons learned on how to target, how to accommodate tissue variability really came from the earlier, I would say, experience with not transcranial, but actually soft tissue target and soft tissue tumors. So to go back to your question about transcranial, this was when we started, was kind of seemed impossible. People said that people were very skeptic that you can get ultrasound energy through the bone, keep it focused, and get enough energy into the brain that you can actually treat without damaging the skull, without causing skull heating and skin burns. And this did require a lot of development, I would say, initially on the focusing part, because the most, I would say, the biggest impact that the bone has on the ultrasound beam is that the variability of the bone, the non-homogeneous bone structure really disrupts a focused beam. So it's much more difficult to keep the beam focused through the skull with respect to any other soft tissue target in the body. So we basically, in the early years of Insightec was established in '99, we started working on the brain as a full program in the early 2000s, like right when the company started. And developing the transcranial focusing was the key part of that, because without that, you could not get the energy to the right target. Now, even at that point in time, there were a few academic teams working on that solution, on how you can focus ultrasound through the skull. And there were, I would say, simulation models that showed that this can theoretically work. Some experience in preclinical settings that on cadaver skulls and all kinds of models that show the potential. But here there's another element that for a company is a little bit different than the academic challenges. That solving a problem in academic setting is the foundation of how you innovate and you solve problems, scientific problems. But then developing that to a real robust medical device is a different challenge. Yes. That's where companies face a challenge that's a little bit different than academia, because you can have a great simulation for how to overcome the defocusing effect of the skull, but if that simulation is takes hours or days to run at the time, like 20 years ago, then it's not useful in the clinical settings, because every time you move the target, you have to rerun that. So a lot of the challenges of I would say the real world challenges from a device perspective, from an industry perspective, are different than just solving the academic problem. So that's where we focused us initially, and we really accelerated and innovated around how you can make quick and real-time algorithms to actually focus through the skull and make sure that you're aiming the ultrasound at the right target.
I think in the beginning you also collaborated or merged with General Electrics. Can you talk a little bit about that, GE?
Yeah, so when Insightec was founded in 1999, it merged its efforts in developing focused ultrasound as a therapy with GE. GE had an innovation lab in the research center in New York that worked on focused ultrasound. And actually the first prototypes of the breast cancer study that we did from the systems perspective were a merge between Insightec's technology and GE's technology. GE had a small research team working on ultrasound for breast cancer, and we merged those efforts when Insightec was founded. We basically took over the GE effort for therapy. GE wanted to focus on diagnostics with ultrasound and with all other modalities. And Insightec took that program and integrated it into what is now become Insightec.
Cool. What was your first FDA approved indication?
So the first FDA indication that we took to market was the uterine fibroids. We basically, in 2004, got that approved. We started working on that product in 2000. So in 4 years, we developed the technology. We installed about 10 or 15 sites in the US, and then ran a full clinical trial and got it approved in 2004. This was basically a treatment where benign tumors in the uterus, which cause a lot of pain and bleeding, discomfort, and sometimes fertility problems for women, need to be treated. Mostly the standard of care for that was hysterectomy, and still is hysterectomy, by the way. And we offered to replace that with a 2-hour procedure, non-invasive, back home the same day by thermally ablating those tumors non-invasively with MR-guided focused ultrasound, where the patient would lie on the table. There would be a transducer, ultrasound transducer integrated into the MR table, and would transmit energy to ablate that tumor. And we basically, this became our first and I would say for many years our biggest commercial program. We probably treated over the years more than 25,000 or 30,000 patients with uterine fibroids. And some sites are still treating that, mostly in China. And basically from 2004 all the way to probably until 6-7 years ago, this was our biggest commercial product for reasons that are more not so much technically, but more on the market creation phase. We at some point in time decided to put our focus on neuro and focus the company around our neuro commercial efforts. And again, it goes back a little bit to what I said with compared to academia. Again, that's another lesson learned for many entrepreneurs out there. To succeed in the market takes much more than just a good technical solution. There's competitive landscape. There's the economics around that. There's the biggest change in the biggest, I would say, challenge in market creation that we are facing with bringing a new modality is that it usually requires a pretty significant change in the workflow and the referral pathway of patients, because we're bringing in something so new that it disrupts the current setting in the hospital and how therapy is being delivered. So that challenge is something that with uterine fibroids, we were successful in the technical part, successful in the clinical part, but at some point in time, focused our resources on neuro and did not kind of bridge the gap to actually make it a big enough commercial success to focus the company on that. And we had to pivot and choose, and we pivoted into
Interesting.
Neuro at that time.
But my understanding is that the uterine fibroid application also matured your understanding of, it probably paved the way to neuro. Is that correct?
It paved the way in many ways. It paved the way because that's where we learned, that there's more to treating with focused ultrasound than just aiming at the right target and actually turning the power on. There are structures you have to be careful with. There's the skin that you have to watch so the energy is not too high on the skin to cause skin burns. There's bones behind the tumors that get some of the far field effect of ultrasound. Ultrasound doesn't stop at the target; it keeps propagating into the bone in the far field, and dealing with that and doing all the treatment planning aspects of how tissue responds to ultrasound. That's what we learned the most, because we treated thousands and thousands of patients of uterine fibroids, and we learned a lot about our thermal simulations, our acoustic simulations in real world tissue, where you have a lot of layers and fat and vasculatures and all kinds of bone, and learning how to deal with the heterogeneity of the tissue structures. What we learned a lot from that, and we also learned a lot on the I would say market creation efforts of how to impact referral pathway, how you can really the importance of workflow, for example, in a medical device is just you can't overemphasize that. I mean, you can have a great technology, but if the workflow, the clinical workflow is not smooth enough, routine enough, fast enough, easy enough, then you just run into a lot of hurdles that prohibit the rate of adoption. And that's where we've learned that in a very meaningful way.
So happy to talk a bit more about that, right? So my understanding of what you've said was that you have a great technology that in theory works really well, but maybe it takes a lot of time for the patients to be in the right position, or even the billing is complicated, or the device is complicated, or these things, and then it just doesn't scale enough, right? Is that what you're saying? Like, because then maybe you get it installed in one hospital and they have some good experience with it, but moving it to the next one or doing high volume is really tough. Does that go in the right direction?
I think there are challenges, and you have to kind of go through all of them. I mean, you have to have technology that works. You have to prove that it's safe and effective. You have to get after you do that, you have to get the clinician, the patient, the treating physicians to really adapt and accept the fact this is a meaningful clinical tool that they would like to use. Then you have to get it through regulatory. And once you get through all that, then you start the market creation phase, which basically is really, to your point, how you scale has a lot to do with the adoption rate of how quickly you scale. It has to do with the referral pathway, the workflow, the competitive landscape, not just with other MR-guided focused ultrasound technologies, but other ways to perform that procedure. And, we can talk about that in neuromodulation as well, because there are other ways to treat, for example, tremor and Parkinson's disease, which is what we treat today. So your competitive landscape is not only your colleagues making the same technology. It's actually what other alternatives that does the patient have to choose from. So there's I would say we've learned a lot in how to impact growth and scale beyond just developing the technology.
Before pivoting to neuro, you also had 2 other indications approved. What were those, and what did you learn there?
The second indication we got approved after fibroids was pain palliation for bone mets. Basically, what happens when you have a primary tumor that metastasizes to the bone, that tumor at the bone both destroys the bone and is very, very painful. And we used the same body platform to treat and heat that tumor to a point where the nerve endings near the tumor were ablated, and therefore relieving the patient from pain immediately. So bone patients that were suffering from pain, which originated from bone mets, could get pain relief almost instantaneously after treatment, immediately after the treatment, which was no other therapy could provide them with that, because the alternative were either medication or opiates, or radiation, which takes many weeks to really have an impact. So we got that approved, and I think that we got that FDA approved and basically that was another application to our body system, which treated uterine fibroids at the time. And the second one was prostate. We developed a transrectal approach to thermally lesion or ablate prostate tissue. Basically, instead of removing or doing a prostatectomy or doing a pretty radical surgery for prostate tumors, provided a focal therapy where you could actually treat only the tumor. You didn't need to heat or ablate the entire prostate. And that led to a much better adverse event profile, or much less adverse events in prostate treatment for prostate cancer. So both of these got approved and went into a certain commercial phase before we pivoted and focused on the undergo.
Before we focus on neuro in the remainder of the conversation, do you think you might ever go back to these applications now that you're a bigger company, and could that happen?
I think focused ultrasound has a lot of potential in body tumors, and basically in prostate specifically, and in other indications, fibroids, liver, or others that we can talk to. I think that the fact that there's room for focused ultrasound in many surgical therapies, I think is well established and understood now. There's a lot of opportunities for us within the brain, but eventually, in our technically, there's a lot of know-how that's very relevant to other body parts as well. So is there potential in the future? Yes. Is it in our plans currently? No. But there's a lot out there to do with focused ultrasound in the body.
Great. And so the pivot to neuro, it seems a bit like you were very successful, but it was a bit hard to create a good market that was maybe sustainable for the company. Now pivoting to neuro seems almost in hindsight like a more complicated, like finding an even harder struggle, right? So hadn't been done before, was certainly not an obvious success. So how did that come? Was it did you really see market analysis wise this would be, if it works, real niche where we can scale up? Or how was it motivated? How did you start, and how did you then also address the challenges of the skull?
So from a market potential and the technical challenge, these are two separate aspects. So I'll touch upon both. I think that first of all, we started the work on the brain actually in parallel to everything that we just discussed. Just that it took it more time because of the techno-clinical challenges to be ready for clinical treatment and then for commercial work. But we started that in parallel for two reasons. One, there's a huge unmet need in non-invasive brain surgery, which we can talk about in a second. And also we knew that if we could prove that focused ultrasound is safe and effective enough to treat the brain non-invasively, it would be pretty obvious that it could be effective in treating many, many other things. As you kind of mentioned, it's probably the highest barrier in terms of the techno-clinical challenge, the importance of accuracy, the not impacting surrounding tissues. It's probably the biggest challenge is in the brain. But we felt that if we prove and we prove that works, then that would open up a lot of other opportunities for us and for the field in general. And I think that realistically, I think it really happened. And the intent was to really touch that holy grail and make sure that if we can get that right, then focused ultrasound has many other potential indications to follow.
Great. What were key challenges and how, I know simulations were very important. You have to kind of simulate how the bone refracts the sound. You had mentioned already before that just moving the spot a little bit would, in the old days, take 20 hours to calculate the new spot or something, right? So how did you overcome these challenges, or what were the challenges? Maybe talk a bit about, if you could, about the, essentially setting us back into time. We're now in the year 2000. What did you guys do, and what were the problems you had?
Right. So I think there's two elements that were focused on first. One is the acoustic phased array, because the phased array, this transducer, this helmet by which you need to transmit energy into the brain, is very, very different than any other body part for multiple reasons. One you touched upon is the fact that the skull is very non-homogeneous and has various thickness, shape, and various intensities or bone densities over different areas of the skull. And that requires a very sophisticated technology to shape your acoustic beam to go through the skull. We call it the focusing algorithms. But to implement that, you need a phased array system with hundreds or thousands of elements that can actually shape the beam to go through the skull. So there was the simulation part, but there was also the design and construction of acoustical phased arrays with thousands of elements that can generate the beam it's one thing to program the beam and do the simulations, and it takes another piece of hardware, a lot of innovation and development. How do you build phased arrays that can actually have thousands of elements and can generate these beams to propagate through the skull? Now, keep in mind that we already knew that feedback is very important, and we knew that we would need MR feedback to measure temperature in the skull, in the brain, in real time. Because again, it's a very unique aspect of what we had to develop, because only MRI can non-invasively measure in real time temperature in the body without having any probe or anything go in the body. And in a sensitive and real-time enough way to be 1 degree accurate and every 3 or 4 seconds get an actual temperature thermal measurement. So integrating that hardware into the MRI was another big technological challenge, because you take two very complex systems, the ultrasound, thousands element phased array, the MRI, and have to merge these two together into one medical device, which is really complex.
Absolutely, yeah. What was your first role at Insightec? You're now CTO, so you're of course well aware of all the technical developments. But yeah, what was your? How did you enter the company at the time?
So I was a software engineer by training at the time. I joined Insightec as actually developing the first generation of user interface for our therapeutic workstation that we have. And that was a big challenge at the time because you take all these complexities, of the physics behind programming the array, the physics behind how to get thermal measurements in the MRI, binding and timing these two together, and run all these complex simulations. But our concept from day one was that there needs to be a clinical decision making in real time, and therefore the treating physician has to be able to operate his surgical tool. Now, the fact the surgical tool is complex is kind of needs to be simplified to a way that a clinician can operate this sophisticated technology. So the user interface was a big challenge back then. How do you take all these complexities and make them into a workflow and control mechanisms and data visualization that the clinician can effectively understand, impact, and control. And that, by the way, is still the more we realize how important that is, the more we invest and improve on that. And it's continuous improvement. I mean, the user interface we had back then is nowhere close to what we have today. Today, we use machine learning algorithms and AI to help us optimize and learn from the treatments that we do into improving algorithms all the time. But I started as a user interface back in the 1999, where user interface was very different than what it is today. And then it evolved over the years. But I would say it taught me that the importance of simplifying, whatever, no matter however the complexity of the problem, simplifying it to the user, just like, that it speaks in the language that the clinician understands, and that it visualizes complex phenomena in a clinically meaningful way, is the key to successful workflow and successful treatment at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you have to make tough choices, right? We create an academic toolbox, Lead DBS, and there it's a bit different, where we maybe want to even have more choices because it's still not figured out what the real workflow is, right? But even there, I mean, getting rid of buttons is not easy, because you know all about it. You want both options, right? But then you realize maybe it's just overwhelming for users to pick them. So I can only imagine for a commercial product that you have to pick one, right? If there's 2 or 3 ways to do this, you should make the choice for the user, and then. All right. Sorry.
I'll just comment on that. I'll just mention how we did. So the system engineering teams have this saying that your design is perfect not when you have nothing to add, when you have nothing you can take away.
Yeah.
Because the idea is usually you start with a lot of features, and we started this in a research setting, which is one, I would say, typical set of cohort of clinicians and users. But today, when we're working within a commercial setting or in a high-scale commercial settings, the what you talked about is actually very, very true, because different users want different workflows, and we have to sort of adapt between, on one hand, keeping the flexibility for each user to adapt what they like and how they like to use the system, but then have a very simple workflow that whoever wants a very simple workflow can still have that. And we try to leverage, balance it. There's always a lot of trade-offs there.
Of course, yeah. Can I ask when you entered? So you entered the company when it was founded, 1999, and
the year it was founded.
How many people were working at Insightec?
When I joined Insightec, probably about 30 people, or between 20 and 30. This was early 95. So I joined in mid 99. The company was formally established in early 99. So it was the first few months the company started.
Yeah. Now it's a very different ship, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
These days. Okay. So with these developments, we heard about the theoretical, phase array beams, getting like the simulations and so on. Were you ready to treat patients at the time?
So, our first neuro clinical prototype was ready in 2005, like probably 5-6 years after we started. It was the first ever transcranial clinical prototype. I mean, as you know, certain labs had various prototypes in preclinical testing, but we got to a point in mid 2005 or early 2005 where we had a clinical prototype that was ready to treat patients. And it had basically a similar helmet from the way you know it today, but very different from the design perspective. And we'll touch upon the progress made maybe a little bit later. But in early 2005, we were ready to treat patients. It was one prototype that we built. Worked with the Brigham at the time and with Kullervo and in his lab and Nathan McDonald in the lab. And basically, we're ready for our first clinical trial. We started with GBM because we thought that it was the right thing to follow and just treat tumors.
Glioblastoma, right? For the
glioblastoma,
naive.
Yeah. Glioblastomas, and we treated 3 patients between the first half of 2005. And this was definitely, just a breakthrough from the fact that this was the first time ever that focused ultrasound was used in transcranially to treat patients. And definitely one of those eureka moments where you actually put ultrasound through the bone in the brain, and a lot of, there were a lot of skeptics that this what risks and what other impact that would have on patients, because technically there was never before was there ultrasound placed at these intensities in the brain through an intact skull.
Of course.
Ever. And that was.
And you could see it, right? You could run another MRI and see it. That's
right. So what we were able to establish was the fact that we actually saw the focus spot at the target. We could see a small lesion in these tumors. We could see the MRI thermometry worked. We could see to a certain extent that the whole outlay concept of the workflow, the fusion between CT and MR, and how we register all those and how we correct for the focusing has the potential to work. And we could actually establish to see a thermal spot in these lesions. But I must say, early with that prototype, we also realized that we're very far from a real product. I mean, we learned a lot from these 3 patients, and we learned many things on the technical and the clinical aspects of that. First of all, this was not the same device we have today. This was a much less powerful system. It had only 500 elements compared to the 1,000 and more that we have today. And it was did not have neither the power nor the element, I would say, accuracy to generate a beam that's powerful enough and focused enough. We also, early on, we wanted to really stay non-invasive. So we used thermoplastic masks, like used in radiation, to immobilize the patient during the treatment, which we thought, from an engineering perspective, that this would be ideal because we did not want to even use pins at the time. But it turned out that the patient moved a lot during the treatment, or moved too much. It was really not tolerable and actually pretty painful for them. So after these 3 patients, we went back to the stereotactic frame, and I would say listen to a lot of neurosurgeons that just said, look, you gotta keep the patient, and the easiest and most, I would say, convenient for the patient to be immobilized is a frame, and that's what we got back to the frame. We had to significantly improve our thermal imaging. It was way too slow and with very, very poor quality. The skull registration, the fusion between CT and MR took very long. It took like dozens of minutes, like 20, 30 minutes. So I would say on one hand, it was a eureka moment because the team saw a focal spot in the brain through an intact skull. Yeah. But on the engineering side, we knew we had to go back to the drawing board and redesign a lot of the system components from scratch.
Yeah. Okay. So what was the mood in the company? I think that in the very first one, there was also a bleeding. Was that part of these three, or was that later?
No, it was later. What happened? These three had no hemorrhages or bleeding.
Okay. Yeah.
They were, I would say, in that sense, safe but not effective enough. That's what we learned from these three.
I see.
These three were there were no safety aspects, but we just learned we will now be able to really treat the tumor in a meaningful way with this type of system. So we went back. You asked about the mood in the company. As I said, we started this with a lot of skepticism, both internally in the company and outside the company. And this only kind of gave more emphasis that this may not work. There may not be a way to drive enough energy to really ablate tumors in a robust way. So we went back and we redesigned the imaging, redesigned the electronics, we built a much more powerful array, and basically, I think about 2 years later, about 2 years later, we were ready to come with basically a platform that's much more robust than that prototype. But we did have a decision point to make, because there was a pathway to abandon this and say, hey, it's not working. Let's focus on what was then our commercial product. So from a company perspective, you always have these trade-offs of how much you pursue a long-term, vision of things like work and traded them off versus short-term progress and progress that you have to make. And it's still happening. It didn't happen back then. We decided not to abandon the neuro at the time. We saw the potential, but there were many voices that said we should shut it down and just commercialize uterine fibers and stay with that. But we
these voices, were these investors or colleagues or friends, or was it also inside the company that many people said, let's shut neuro down? Or
it was both. It was both. There was definitely a debate internally. There's never, like with anything, there's never enough resources to do everything you want to do.
Sure.
Right. So how do you balance? And there's in commercial companies, there's always a balance between short and long term. And I would say Insightec through the time has been able to leverage that and balance that well enough to get to a point where, at the end of the day, neuro became our biggest commercial success, and really, I think, drove ultrasound to where it is today. So we basically bet on our scientific and engineering teams to be able to overcome the challenges that prototype had. So they went back and they redesigned the system with a probe that had now 1,000 elements, that had new electronics that could drive 4 times the power, that a patient interface that was much more tolerable. We improved the MRI imaging. We made the key algorithms much more robust and speedy, and it was a complete redesign of basically the system that's from the outside looks like what we have today, and the internals, obviously, progress has been made. And with that system, and to what you asked about, with that system, we went back to the Brigham, we went back to our GBM study. This was actually a low frequency system at the time, because one of the ideas to have more energy go through the skull was to lower the frequency. And that's why we designed our lower frequency helmet. Basically designed because the higher the frequency, the more the bone absorbs ultrasound. So the lower the frequency, the more ultrasound you get into the brain.
Yeah.
And we went back with that system with the low frequency transducer back in 2007 and returned to that GBM study. And we treated one patient. That patient, a week after the treatment, had a hemorrhage that eventually led to him passing away. And we kind of took that as another kind of critical point to say, hey, then was this procedure related? How did this happen? Is this attributed to the low frequency because we didn't see that in the high frequency? And we got back and really evaluated how we can improve that and get back to the safety that we had in the original three patients before then. So again, another re-engineering cycle and rethinking cycle. But we also learned another thing that's important from a clinical, trial design. We went to GBM patients initially because at the time, MRgFUS ultrasound in the brain was very, very unique. It was new to and the clinical research community. It was new to the FDA, and it was considered high risk from the regulatory perspective.
Sure.
And these types of challenges usually lead the study design to patients that have very few other alternatives to exploit in their disease progression or disease pathway of their disease. But GBM is a very, very, I would say, challenging target specifically for ultrasound. First of all, they have their tendency to bleed even without procedure, so there's some risk in bleeding regardless. They're very, very heterogeneous, very, very vascular, very, very, I would say, prone to mechanical effects and cavitation effects of ultrasound that make them very risky. And at the end of the day, I think that's what led us to this unfortunate event. Again, unfortunately, we went through that, we learned a lot, and we got back to the higher frequency with our new electronics. So we basically went back to the 650 kilohertz transducer, which was proven safe on the first 3 patients, but now with a brand new exablade platform that is more powerful and more suitable for clinical need. And we kind of looked for a different target than GBM because we felt continuing to treat GBM with lesioning may kind of put this whole concept at risk because it's very, very heterogeneous, very, very prone to hemorrhages or bleeding, and we need a different target.
Interesting. Okay, and maybe before we move to the different target, have you been to the Brigham at the time? Or was there a team of Insightec present? I've just spent 3 years there. That's why curious whether you had been there at the time as well, or friends of yours. So
I've been at the Brigham almost as my home for those kind of 5-6 years. Spent a lot of time in Kulevra's lab. At the time at the Brigham, you probably know Frank Yolich, which was the kind of great visionary of focus ultrasound and many, many other image-guided therapy at the Brigham. This was done all in collaboration with them. Our physicist team, our engineering team, me, myself were there for the whole set of that study. Very, very tight collaboration between the Brigham and Insightec at that time.
And the collaboration was probably, you're a company from Israel doing this in the US probably because of Kulevra's lab, right? Because they also had potential to, makes sense. So they were already...
Kulevra's lab at the time was definitely the biggest focus ultrasound lab around. I would say it's 2 things. It's the Brigham being, the fact that they were very advanced and innovative in neuro research at the time and still are probably. And that the focus ultrasound expertise there were very, very great partners and great collaborators with us.
So you learned from the glioblastoma that it is possible, right? But it's maybe not the right indication because of the cavitations and risk of bleeding and so on. How did you get to explore thalamotomy? Why move to that?
So around 2006, I think, we came to know a team in Zurich, actually, that was doing thalamotomies for treatment of neuropathic pain, actually with RF lesion, just like you're aware of. So they were doing bilateral lesions in the central medial nuclei in the thalamus for pain. And they became aware of our technology. We came and presented it to them. And we said, look, we shared with them our experience, and they said, okay, that may be an even better way to do the thalamotomies that we do today non-invasively, if we can do them non-invasively. And because of that experience, and because we never did it before, and because, as you're well aware, I'm sure this audience is well aware, that the thalamus is a very, very sensitive and delicate area. You really want to target only the nuclei you want to target. You cannot have any surrounding effects on the surrounding tissue or any effects on the surrounding tissue.
So but it is in the center of the brain, right? Which is...
That's right.
Fits well. Yeah, sorry.
So it fits well the technical need, but there's also clinical challenges that it comes with.
Yes.
Because you want to really be very well focused and very sharp in your focusing, so you're not getting any damage on surrounding tissue.
Yeah.
So for almost 2 years, we worked with them on just testing the systems on ex vivo skulls and cadaver models and simulations that we ran. and like dozens of experiments that they ran in non-human settings on cadaver models and ex vivo skulls until around late 2008. Both teams felt that yeah, we're ready to go and do the first thalamotomy, and that basically changed everything. I mean, September 23rd, 2008. It's a time to remember for focus ultrasound, kind of history, where the first non-invasive thalamotomy was done in a neuropathic pain patient. 2 lesions, perfectly shaped, perfectly placed, in the same treatment, could be easily seen on MRI with no adverse events or side effects to the patient. And we kind of felt this was maybe the biggest eureka moment of saying, hey, now we got it right, because you could actually, everything worked. I mean, the thermometry worked well. The lesion shape and location was perfect. The impact on the patient was perfect. There was no side effects. And I would say probably, that's 8 years into this. Kind of said, okay, now we're onto something.
Fantastic. It seems like I have goosebumps right now. So it all kind of came together, right? So all the many struggles and valleys you had to go through, but now this was the right indication. The technology was ready. The company was ready. Was this in Zurich or at Brigham?
In Zurich. In
Zurich, okay.
So in Zurich was the first thalamotomy. I would say, Andy, at the time, it was not obvious on the clinical side to take the risk and do transparent lesioning in the thalamus. That was a very unique team that kind of saw the opportunity, had the experience with RF lesioning, which at the time was already kind of losing its momentum for DBS, and went back and tried it. So their pioneering spirit and our lessons learned through the hoops we had to go through, I think, was a perfect match and a perfect timing. That sometimes you can't plan these things; they just happen, and really turned was mostly the biggest inflection point in the neuro program when we actually saw that first thalamotomy perfectly placed and non-invasively. And this went on to be a small 12-patient study for neuropathic pain that then expanded to a 30-patient study, and that's when we really changed things for us on the neuro program.
Very interesting. And it's also a big shift going away from tumors, which are, things you want to remove, to essentially, I don't think it's intact tissue, right? But it seems like intact tissue that you want to maybe ablate. And I think you mentioned before that you kind of owe this to the Zurich team, or like without them, this would not have happened. So you were really an oncology treatment company before this, I think, right? Or can you talk about that a bit?
When we looked from the way companies look at markets, we look at the market on neurosurgery, and there's 2 big things in neurosurgery. There's vascular, like stroke and other indications, which are not so much lesioning. There may be room for that in the future for focus ultrasound, but we did not start there. And there's tumors. The neuromodulation part in surgery back 20 years ago was not very big. There was DBS, which was big, and it was kind of upcoming and growing, but it was smaller from a market assessment perspective than tumors or vasculature. So we never thought we would do neuromodulation as a starting point. We thought we would do tumors, and that will evolve into tumors and epilepsy, and then potentially neuromodulation. By the way, neuromodulation, from the way we saw it back then, was the most challenging, because the accuracy, the precision, the side effects in the thalamus, as you know very well, is very, very demanding. It's much more demanding than doing surgery on epilepsy or tumors.
Yeah.
So
you see the tumor, right?
Right.
You might not
so
see
even the targeting.
Right.
Even the targeting is much more complex. So from the way companies look at markets, the way companies look at device development, it was not trivial that should be the starting point.
So it looked like at this time in history, September 23rd in 2008, that you were on your way to become a neuropathic pain company, but that didn't happen.
That didn't happen because we tried to explore, can we scale a market in neuropathic pain? And how is that patient population being treated today? And I would say that the Zurich team was a pretty unique setting that actually treated or had a neurosurgery program for neuropathic pain. Not too many neurosurgery departments had that. Neither the experience of lesioning for pain, nor how to scale a patient, program around treating pain patients or neuropathic pain patients with surgery, with brain surgery. It was not a common. So what we did instead, we kind of said, look, we did multiple advisory boards with many people or key opinion leaders in the field, and kind of show them what the experience in thalamotomy looked like, and said, okay, what else can we do? What other indications can benefit from this capability? And at some point in time, the essential tremor came up as something that historically, and you know this very well from the many podcasts on this session that you're doing, when lesioning was performed before DBS, then movements, all those were treated with thalamotomies at the time, and that kind of came back. So, and the people said, okay, that's a potential, but we don't recommend you go there because everybody's doing DBS now, and why would anybody go back to do lesioning? So, most of the physicians at the time were not so I would say did not adapt going back to lesioning very, very easily. And also essential tremor was a patient population that, because of the invasiveness of DBS, were not the most commonly treated with DBS, mostly Parkinson's disease. So essentially go to Parkinson's disease. And we had to go through all this market assessment phase at that point in time.
I think you mentioned that most people at the time told you that it would just be a handful of patients per center that could be done in a year, right, with essential tremor. So there would like 5 to 8 patients per year or so, which we now know is not the case. But that was what they told you back then.
Yeah, because the essential tremor patient population is greatly disabled by the disease.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it has a huge dramatic effect on their life and their lifestyle and their disability. But they choose not to go through, and they take medication, which helps to a certain degree at a certain point in time. But then when they become therapy resistant to the drug, they chose not to go, or most of them chose not to go through the invasive surgery of either having an RF lesion or having a DBS. That was just what the fact was. Most of the patients were left untreated when they became drug resistant. So that there were very small volumes at the time in neurosurgery departments of actual essential tremor patients. So that was the feedback we got, that it may take a very, very long time to run a study and get that approved. Again, the way things happened. Fortunately enough, there was this team in the University of Virginia, which was led by Jeff Elias at the time, that said, "Hey, we will do this feasibility." It was a 15-patient study, and we decided to run and see, hey, let's see that one is effective and safe for essential tremor, and that we can actually recruit 15 patients. And it was not obvious. We estimated this would take probably 2 to 3 years, just based on the fact that the numbers you mentioned were the typical patient volume in these centers. But what would happen? We started this study in February 2011, and by August 2011, the study was done.
Wow!
All 15 patients were done in 6 months.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because as soon as that study, that community became aware that there's a non-invasive solution for essential tremor, there was a big move towards getting on board in this study. That was another kind of big surprise, another eureka moment that when you bring a new solution to an existing problem, you may find it may be very, very helpful to patients that until that time just stayed without therapy.
It's very interesting also tying back to what you said in the beginning about, creating a market. It can be unpredictable also in this way, where you underestimate the market because you would introduce something that's just easier to apply, right? You talked about this, it has to be smooth, right? And if it's very smooth, it could be the market is much bigger than you thought. Is that correct?
I think when you bring something that's fundamentally different from the patient experience that the patients know today, and you can think about anything that we use, not just in clinical settings, in every setting.
Sure.
When you have a product that fundamentally changes the value proposition for the patient or the way the patient will receive the relief, then it may also fundamentally change the market size and the market opportunity.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's possible to predict that, and sometimes it's hard to predict that, because I would say it was not a complete, surprise in the sense that we knew, everybody knows that the patient population suffering from essential tremor is very, very large. People knew that. We knew there was a potential for that. What we had to overcome is show that it's effective, show that it's safe, and show that the patient experience is going to be significantly different than invasive surgery, that a much bigger patient population would opt to go get treated.
Yeah, it's almost like it's each like we see this every day these days with the focused ultrasound devices too, right? If a new clinic opens up shop, for example, Freiburg in Germany just had it as a new device, I think since maybe half a year ago or a few months ago, and Volker König told me the same story. They got many calls, right? Much more than for DBS, and there seems to be this kind of first of all, it's good marketing, right? It's incisionless and so on, but also there seems to be people that, as you say, would love to change their disease, but they would not want to have brain surgery in the classical sense, right? And that is something, I mean, everybody, even starting from when Andres Lozano started advocating for it, and then at the time it was still kind of new in the commercial sense. He also said that it even sometimes drove the DBS numbers up because more people came into the clinic, then got evaluated, right? But there was, like, it seems to be there's a big sleeping market, it seems, right? That nobody knows until you have such a device in a way, right?
Yeah, I think it was two things that kind of think fundamentally changed. The fact that that I'll call it, for the patient's perspective, it looks and feels more like a therapy than a surgery, because they don't feel like they're going through surgery. They're not going through anesthesia. They're not going through. There's no cuts. The effect is immediate. They walk out of the room and the tremor is impacted right away. There's no tuning or anything to do afterwards. And I think all these aspects together kind of drove this change in what we can actually offer patients.
Super cool. What were next steps? You mentioned the Virginia study. What came next? So you realized you were onto something, but what happened then?
So, since we had a lot of experience with other indications, we learned that we should make no shortcuts. And on one hand, for example, the way we designed the bigger study and the data collection, we said it's going to be a level 1 evidence, randomized controlled trial, went all the way to submitted in the New England Journal of Medicine. It really made no shortcuts, because we knew that adoption would actually be impacted a lot, and the buy-in from the clinical communities and the professional neurosurgery society, their acceptance of that would just require the most rigorous study design, publication, and rigor we can implement. So we made no shortcuts. We did the right study design and the right publication to follow up with that. And I think that we knew that there's in the neurosurgery society, there's people that are still aware of the benefits of lesioning for certain patients, certain patient population. You and colleagues like yourself that developed the noble art of lesioning, and keeping that momentum of training new surgeons, of actually being aware and knowing which patient can benefit from lesioning. We said, okay, that's just a new tool to a known modality that would kind of really reinvent how we can bring this known clinical impact into patients.
Super cool. And you did mention you published in New England Journal of Medicine, and I think this pushed out the acceptance of getting the paper out a long time, which we as scientists suffer from already, right? For our careers of the PhD students and all that, right?
Yeah.
But as a company, I would think, okay, if this takes a year longer, that's significant, right? To money-wise, or can you talk a bit about that, right?
It's very significant.
Yeah.
It's very significant, and I would say, it's not just the 1 year. But it goes back to my theme of don't make shortcuts, because at least not on the data and the evidence, because strong and rigor on data in the clinical setting, I think, will always pay back. And so we had to wait after FDA for another year of follow-up with these patients because we wanted a real long follow-up for tremor. I would say we then followed up for 5 years, these same patients, and published on 5-year data. Because at the end of the day, both from creating a market requires this level of rigor. So there's no, I would say, no pushback on the fact that, hey, you may not have the right data or the right impact on patients. So the more you invest in good clinical study design, the more you invest in rigor and data collection and the longer follow-up, at the end of the day, it pays back. But as we mentioned earlier, it's a trade-off because it takes more time. There's no way to shorten the follow-up.
So and time is money for you, right? Yeah, just to even pay employees and everything. Yeah, okay, yeah.
So we started commercializing, as soon as we got FDA approval, but we knew that until we get the 3-year data and the 5-year data and the reimbursement that requires that level of long-term evidence and outcome, it would be hard to scale. And that's why our earlier years were challenged by that. We had to just wait for that to happen.
Got it. So, did I understand right that FDA approval and reimbursement was tied to this being like the long-term follow-up? Interesting. Okay.
The regulatory approval came in, I think, mid-2016, but that required a 3-month follow-up to get FDA approval. We waited a year to publish because we wanted to publish in the New England Journal of Medicine. That required 1-year follow-up. And then for reimbursement, again, different levels of reimbursement required more follow-up until we had this 5-year data, which is the last we published.
Okay, so this was the feasibility trial, probably one of the most pivotal things in the history of MR-guided focused ultrasound to show, publish in such a prestigious journal like the New England Journal, show it's feasible. But after that, there's a roadmap to commercialization. What was that?
So I think the roadmap to commercialization goes through, first of all, I would say the technicality of getting approved and getting it covered by either private insurers and then national coverage. Each country has its own, mechanics of how you get that done and processes. Some are longer, some are shorter. Some allow you to leverage kind of other country evidence or global evidence. Some require local evidence or local guidelines or vetting by local societies. So then after you start in a pathway where in each of your key markets, you have to go through that process. And we did that pretty quickly. In a few years, got it reimbursed in the key markets. But I would say in some regions in Europe, we're still struggling with it. We still need to get that done. So it's a work in progress that takes a few years.
What changed of how people think of lesioning with this?
I think, as you mentioned, that was one very, very pivotal moment when that was published in New England Journal of Medicine. And you know better than anybody that the society back then, the Neurosurgery Society, all the movement is all those specialists, especially around the functional neurosurgeons, were all around DBS, which has a lot of benefit for many, many patients. And I would say changing the mindset of they would call it going back to lesioning. We thought it's not going back. It's actually going forward, because the way we do lesioning is nothing like has been done, in the early 60s or 70s. Because it's not just the focused ultrasound that's non-invasive. the fact there's no tissue shift with the probe, the fact that it can be, I would say, localized and moved in real 3 dimensions, not just along the trajectory of the tract if you need to readjust or pivot. But actually, we position this as leveraging other advancements in MR imaging, of actually doing functional imaging and functional mapping and later tractography to actually have a much more personalized lesioning technology than in the earlier decades. I mean, you know, the earlier decades when you really did not have any personalized lesioning. The lesioning we can do with focused ultrasound has 2 fundamental ways of how we personalize it. First, it's the imaging that's advanced a lot since then, since the early days. First of all, MRI anatomy has gotten much better. DTI and tractography and a lot of capabilities to actually personalize the target based on the individual's MRI images, and not just go by stereotactic coordinates, or adapted basic stereotactic coordinates per patient. But on top of that, which is very unique for ultrasound, we do this, I'll call it stimulation sonication before we actually ablate the tissue, which with RF is more difficult to do, or not doable, because we can actually do a small non-lesional thermal rise of 3-4 degrees, which has some transient effect on the tremor or side effects if you're off target a bit. And you can actually not only personalize the targeting based on feedback you get from the patient, you also can actually see the lesioning happening in real time and sculpture it and move it and actually around in 3D space to personalize and manage the risk benefits for each patient a little bit differently. If there's more tremor, you maybe choose to be or decide to be more aggressive and create a little bit larger lesion. If the tremor goes away after the first sonication or second thermal sonication in the lesioning phase, then you may choose to pause it to stop. So it gives much more flexibility. So from imaging, from the non-invasiveness, from the ability to localize and personalize target, we felt it was a completely different way of doing lesioning with compared to the past.
Yeah, I mean, even hearing you speak about it now and thinking about all the technologically complexity to get there and get it done it's remarkable. You can test sonicate, but you can also see where you test sonicated. You get sculpted around. Maybe in the future even more, right? Like you could imagine algorithms would help you shape it around, or there's so much already done, but also that could be done with this technology. So really fantastic. What do you think, like speaking about the future of FUS, what do you think are the next challenges or next opportunities of the field?
Yeah, so I think, Insightec has achieved a lot in positioning focused ultrasound in a way that I think now, in the brain, but not only in the brain, I think as a modality that has a role in medical care. I think many have tried before, and we've been persistent enough and lucky enough and innovative enough, whatever, to really, I think now there's definitely a role for focused ultrasound in therapy in general and in the brain specifically. So today, I think does focused ultrasound have a role in healthcare? I think it's just, the question should be how big and where is that role? It's not an if anymore.
Yes,
I think that if you look at kind of where we started this in 1999, where this was more a science project with a huge potential, I think now it's a reality, and we can just debate on how big the potential is and where the shortest improvements that can be. But I think we've crossed that barrier. Or is there a role? I think there is a role. It's just a question of how big it is and how fast will the market adapt it. I think that's our next challenge.
And I think so. I heard this at a conference that last year or even before, focused ultrasound has been the main treatment modality for essential tremor, overtaking DBS and other modalities. Do you see maybe similar growth curves for other disorders or new indications even that you might be exploring these days that could overtake other forms of treatment?
First of all, for essential tremor, it's absolutely right. And I think that we see that number growing every year. I think that you can just say we probably, 2024, last year, we treated more essential tremor patients than any other surgical modality, as you mentioned. And I think that we will probably treat in the following years even more and more. That's growing all the time. And I think that the movement is all those. We are also approved for Parkinson's disease in most of the world. I see this more in general as a complementary tool. We don't have a claim that this will treat every patient. There's definitely benefit in the other treatment modalities, in DBS and others, and medication for certain patients. But there are certain patients that need or would be best served by lesioning treatment or what we can do. So I think for us, it's growing the awareness and awareness within patients, awareness within physicians, awareness within the community, awareness within insurers of actually, making this therapy as an option to every patient that can benefit from that. And I think there's more and more for us to learn how we actually improve and increase that patient population that can benefit from the technology.
Fantastic. You recently launched the Exablade Prime. What did it bring? What's new with it? It still has a frame or not?
Yeah, it still has a frame. Basically, the frame is there mostly because we need the head really, really stable during the procedure, because we're making this personalized targeting where you move the spot by a fraction of a millimeter, which has an impact in the thalamus, needs the head to be very, very, very rigid and precise. So we don't want to move that during the procedure. So from the almost decade now since our first approval in 2016, we improved a lot, and we learned a lot from our customers, from our patients, from the feedback we get from the users. And the biggest thing we're focused on is how to continuously improve the patient experience. And the patient experience, I mean, preparing for the treatment, during the treatment, after the treatment, and making the treatment as short as possible, as tolerable as possible, reducing side effects. That has to do a lot with what Andy, you mentioned earlier about spot shaping and spot targeting, and how we use all the personal information to actually improve the patient experience. We believe that if we continuously improve the patient experience, meaning less side effects, shorter treatments, better efficacy, then this is the key to our progress and success, and just bring this and do better for those patients. So really focus on improving the patient experience, and the rest will follow. Prime is our newest product release, because this is a version that we worked on for the past 5 years almost. And it basically took the data from the first 6,000 or 7,000 patients we treated between 2016 to 2019, let's call it, and did a lot of learning from our users, from the workflow, and that data was fed to multiple machine learning algorithms to actually improve and automate a lot of the things that we used to do, or physicians used to do, manually. So predictive models for the right parameters for each patient, the best parameters to overcome the skull focusing, integrated proctography as a treatment, as an input to the treatment planning phase. We baked all that into a workflow that's much more optimized. If the first treatment I go back to the first treatment, these took like hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, sometimes 5 hours. Today, typical treatment in the commercial settings takes an hour and a half.
Wow. Okay.
So all these improvements are not only the technology, it's the physicians getting trained and getting confidence in the system, but there's a lot of progress, a lot of manual things that were done and were very tedious and time-consuming that became automated, and with a lot of assisting tools for the physicians for their decision making. But I would say that it's a huge step up from our previous versions. Probably our first, I would say, fully commercial product version that took all the inputs from 5 years of working in the field into a really most advanced product that we have. And there's still more to do. We still learn a lot from our current users. The more we do, the more we learn. We survey the customers, we survey our users, our patients. We try to learn what will get us to our ultimate goal. And our ultimate goal is that the patient experience will be such that every patient that can benefit from the treatment will actually get it. That every physician will feel comfortable that for the right patients, it's the right treatment and would not hesitate. And it has to do with improving our side effect profile and making it shorter treatment and making it more tolerable. And there's a lot more to do on that.
Of course.
We talked about the frame and the pins. We're still asking for the patients to shave their hair before the treatment. We want to get rid of that at a certain point in time. So there's still a lot of things there to do to get to our ultimate goal of making really, really, I would say, patient-friendly and physicians' preferred choice for patients that can benefit from it.
Fantastic. What's in the future beyond movement disorders?
So I think that's a big question. I think there's the way we look at the future for us and for focus ultrasound in the brain. There's various aspects, and there's a lot of. I would say I'm proud that we put the technology at a point where physicians feel confident enough to do site-initiated studies and explore other things, and there's studies going on for unique indications that can benefit from lesioning in the center of the brain. One target is ANT for epilepsy that's been published, and other targets, some are still studying neuropathic pain, and this may evolve to a much bigger opportunity. And I think that one venue is the thermal lesioning, and where else can we do that in the brain? The other aspect of where this can go in the future is non-thermal lesioning that is now being recently approved for liver tumors or liver treatments with histotripsy. There's definitely a potential for such therapy in the brain as well. I think we're years away from that, but I think it may open up other opportunities for targets that we cannot reach with thermal ablation, just because of the physical constraints of driving enough energy to the target. So I think at whole, our vision would be that in neurosurgery, there would be an acoustic neurosurgery platform that can actually treat any surgical target, not invasively, just hard stuff, no radiation, no incisions, and there does not need. I mean, there will be a day when we will say, why did we cut the body to destroy that target? There are non-invasive ways to destroy that target that are safe and effective, and that's what we've shown in the VIM in the thalamus. And there's other targets that can greatly benefit from such a vision and a technology.
You mentioned there will be a day with an acoustic neurosurgery suite. I think when I talked to Kullervo and he had to have nudged him to talk about the distant future, he said everybody will have a device at home. Would you go that far?
So I think there's definitely. So I talked about the surgical pathway, which is I would say the most. I would call it near term. I think it's within reach. I think outside of that, you touched upon two things, and what you mentioned with Kullervo is all kinds of, I would call, non-surgical uses of focused ultrasound, be it neuromodulation, be it blood-brain barrier disruption, and I would even go as far as the vision of brain mapping that you could study. I mean, I envision a day where this is safe enough that you can, just like you study healthy volunteers with in MRI imaging, because you think MRI is safe enough, then there will be a day when we can use focused ultrasound for brain mapping, for either localizing a disease or diagnosing a neurological pathology without lesioning, just by neuromodulation. And I think the vision of home care with focused ultrasound for neuro or other aspects, especially in the neuromodulation domain, I think, is probably doable. It'll require a lot of understanding, not so much the technology, by the way, or more the understanding of the right targets, the right parameters, and the right disease states to where to utilize that. But I see that we've crossed the barriers I mentioned earlier between focused ultrasound being a vision and a science project to being a treating modality or treatment modality that can be used in multiple ways. Surgical and lesioning is one of them, maybe the first and the most obvious. We made a lot of progress on blood-brain barrier disruption as well to deliver drugs into the brain. And I think we all know neuromodulation is the next big thing. That can start in a clinic setting, can move to home care. And I think we all see pathways to make that happen.
Super cool. Just talked to Leonard Verhagen, who you may know, of course, in Nijmegen, and he mentioned for the functional uses. So you talked about brain mapping, right? Looking at, for the listener, this would be like trying with ultrasound to look at what the brain is doing, the brain activity mapping, like fMRI is doing at the moment. This is a very active field of study. Certainly in animals, but even I think in humans, theoretically possible, including with the intact skull. But I think so far uses injections of micro bubbles, lipids, something, a contrast enhancing. But he mentioned that it could be theoretically possible without that even in the future. Apparently needs a lot of, like, is more a computational problem rather than a. Is that true? Is that accurate?
I think it's a computational problem, and that will, again, eventually we'll overcome that. I think computational power is becoming higher and better every day. I think, why do I believe focused ultrasound has a unique role in that? Because it goes back to the basics of what we're able to do today is focus ultrasound in the neuromodulation phase. In any location in the brain, we can do that non-invasively. We can do it very precisely. We can actually stimulate more than one target at a time, or the sequence of stimulation that no other invasive modality can do. So if you want to actually, and I think where neuromodulation will go, is that you need to, I think it's not going to be like in oncology or even in what we do with functional neurosurgery today. Neuromodulation is going to be much more about circuits than targets. So what other modality, if you think of a modality that you want to stimulate in a certain pattern, in a certain timing, for example, circuitry in the two hemispheres, or circuitry along various neural network, then focused ultrasound can do that, because you can rapidly steer, you can steer it anywhere, and you can stimulate multiple targets either simultaneously or in a certain sequence of timing to either study or replicate or diagnose a certain pathology. So I think there's so much to do there that the computational power will obviously grow to a point where we'll see focused ultrasound really play a role in a way that no other modality can actually do, non-invasively.
Yeah. And there are many startups also popping up these days in this field. I think it's very exciting to think about the future. I really like your acoustic surgery suite where you can do all of these things. You did mention blood-brain barrier opening. That is, I think, widely known by now. The idea where you open it and then a drug can perfuse, it'll enter the brain locally, not everywhere, right? So, for example, to treat a tumor or other disorders. Very fascinating concept. I think a little bit lesser known would be the inverse of that, to essentially take a biopsy by opening the blood-brain barrier locally where you are interested in what happens there, and then things from the brain can enter the bloodstream, and you can take blood and measure it, right? So these two things, although very similar, one is more for treatment, one more for diagnostics. Can you give an overview or state of the field of these two things, and what the developments are, who the key players are, the successes, and so on?
Yeah, so I think that's we started with blood-brain barrier opening. Again, was studied in preclinical settings for many decades. And I think there was always a promise that if you can deliver drugs or any other agents, call it gene therapy, viral vectors, drugs, into the brain more effectively, then that would have a huge impact on certain diseases, mostly oncology, but not only oncology. So we adapted our platform to allow blood-brain barrier opening. And we've probably done hundreds of sessions by now in multiple studies in disease states, and we're seeing great, promising results in that domain. I think it's pretty well established by what we've published and what others have published that the fact that we can demonstrate localized and transient BBB disruption is well established. I mean, it's again beyond the fact that yes, you can safely and effectively open up the blood-brain barrier. It took not more than a few years for the community at large to kind of accept that. Many published around that with our technology, with other devices, and I think now it's more on the research of the right drug, the right disease, the right dosing, and there's multiple studies and startups and other companies following that pathway. And I think, again, you can look at this even more broadly and say, the fact we're opening up, again, it's the only modality that can do that. Ultrasound is the only modality that can locally and in a transient way disrupt the blood-brain barrier, and no other modality can do that. Now, that on its own changes the dynamics of how the body reacts to that. There were originally a few studies that showed that even that on its own has effect in certain disease states because you are helping the body do something it could never do before. So there's a pathway there. What to study further? What does just blood-brain barrier disruption, even without a drug, can actually do for certain neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or ALS or others? Now, on top of that, you can deliver agents, and you can deliver drugs that are known today to not penetrate the blood-brain barrier and make them more effectively locally, or even reduce the overall dosage and toxicity in other parts of the body, because that's what usually happens today. You increase the toxicity to get enough drug into the brain, but you don't need to do that if the blood-brain barrier is disrupted or opened at the target region. And maybe the future of that is actually delivering, I would say, more biologically targeted, I'll call them agents like gene therapy or immunotherapy drugs that are actually optimized for certain gene or certain oncology pathology to treat and deliver more effectively into the brain through disruption of the blood-brain barrier. And there's multiple, ways to do that. I think the fact that it can be done non-invasively is pretty well established today by what we've studied and explored and what others have shown. Again, our technology today, we run it in various trials. One of them is, as you mentioned, is in the diagnostic setting of actually opening up the blood-brain barrier to get tumor DNA information into the blood and getting that analyzed to make much more proper disease management decisions making by clinicians and add to whatever can be done with physical biopsies or imaging that are neither easy to do or easy to interpret. So adding that component of real-time and frequently accessed DNA information from ever-evolving tumors, especially GBM and the like, is very, very helpful for assessing disease progression and disease management decisions.
Fantastic. Can you maybe just briefly touch upon sonogenetics, maybe even for the listener, briefly tell what it is and whether you see a future of this?
So sonogenetics or sonodynamic therapy actually, evolved from photodynamic therapy, where certain drugs that get activated by the ultrasound. So certain drugs are activated by light, and you use laser to activate the drug, but you can also use on certain drugs sound or the pressure wave to actually activate the drug. And there's various studies of that with our platform as well. around agents that can be delivered systemically. They get to the tumor, but the ultrasound activates them only at the tumor site. And there are certain initial evidence that that has been very, very promising in certain oncology settings, DIPG and others for young patients. And we're following that as well. Again, it's one of those areas that ultrasound is the means to deliver the therapy. It's not actually doing the therapy, it's the drug that's doing the therapy, but again, it's the only way to do this non-invasively.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you'd have to put some light source, either a laser or some other light source into the target to activate the drug. But the wonder, the wonderful thing about ultrasound is that it can activate it non-invasively.
Very interesting. Yeah. Okay. I want to be respectful of your time. With just a few rapid fire questions to wrap up. This was super enlightening already. Do you have any advice for young, maybe even researchers, academics that want to enter industry, or other people that want to start their career in industry? Any young people advice?
First of all, I must say that the great thing about the ultrasound societies and meetings, that you see so many more young people today getting into ultrasound. By the way, both on the clinical side and on the scientific side. And you see people, young people today, coming out of fellowships and saying, "Hey, yeah, I'm going to do lesioning for these patients because lesioning is back," and we didn't see that 15, 20 years ago. So that's great to see. In terms of advice, it's you saw the pathway. You got to be persistent with what you believe in. There's a lot of hurdles, a lot of hoops to go through. But I think it's just, I would say my lesson is that the rigorous work and pays off at the end of the day. I think you wanna do something meaningful for patients. It may not come at the first shot. It may not be quick, but when you get there, it's really worthwhile.
Fantastic. Any missed opportunities we have as a field, right? Things we should be doing but are not doing enough. And I mean the entire field of neuromodulation, but it could be focused ultrasound.
For neuromodulation, I think that the field will evolve a lot with this being non-invasive. I think this field has been very invasive. It's going to be either recording electrodes, lesioning, or treating electrodes. But the fact that you bring to this whole field of neuromodulation a non-invasive tool, I think will just unleash so many opportunities that I can't even and to think of. I think we just need to study that with the neurology community, with neurosurgeons, with neuroscientists, and the fact just the advancements in both imaging, understanding of the brain, and non-invasive technology that can kind of link the two. I think it's just the beginning what we'll understand about neuroscience in general.
Is there anything you would have wanted me to ask beyond? I know we covered a lot. Maybe we covered everything, but any final question I should have asked?
I think we covered everything, and I think this series of podcasts that you put is very, very instrumental in neuromodulation in general. I think it brings to, I would say, younger adults the history, which is so important. It evolved over so many decades with so many lessons learned. I mean, I shared mine, but I'm sure the others have shared theirs, and there's so much to learn from. And at the end of the day, I think understanding the brain, that this century of brain understanding is just ahead of us, and I think it's going to be a lot of innovation going that way.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Eyal, for taking the time of your busy schedule, and I hope you get to enjoy the beach a bit these days. I have to say it because I see it and I envy you a bit there in Haifa. Would love to meet at SCAM conferences, and thanks again for taking part. Yeah, thank you.
Sure, and I really appreciate you taking the time and giving me the opportunity, and also for carrying this podcast, which is really, really great.
Thank you.